Last time on Garage Woodworks, we prepared our stock and template routed the top and bottom pieces of our G&G style picture frame. We created mortises for the inlay, and we flushed the ebony inlay down to the surface of the chair using a block plane and a card scraper. Garage Woodworks is sponsored by Highland Woodworking. Visit them at their website at highlandwoodworking.com.
Welcome to the Garage Woodworks video podcast.
If you've watched any of my videos up to this point, you would know that I'm a huge fan of loose tenon joinery, and for this project nothing's really changed. In order to route all of the mortises for the loose tenon joinery, I'm going to use my horizontal mortiser. I have a stop set up on my table so it'll be easy to batch mortise all of the pieces. For the long grain mortises in the cloud lift portion of the piece, I'm going to again use my horizontal mortiser. And because I can use the same router setup for both the long grain mortises and the end grain mortises, when the two pieces come together, they should be flush on top. Now that I have all the long grain mortises cut and the end grain mortises cut, I can start working on the stock for the loose tenons. When you go to make your tenon stock, because the router leaves rounded ends in the end grain mortise, I have two options. I can either round over the tenon stock, or I can square off the ends of the end grain mortise. I like to round over the tenon stock, and because my tenon stock is a 1/4 inch thick, I can do this at the router table using an 1/8 inch radius roundover bit. By far, the safest way to cut your tenon stock is to use a table saw sled. And I've set up a stop block at the required distance from my tenon material, and I'm going to use a pencil with a good eraser on the end to hold the material down as I cut it. Now that I have all the tenon material cut, I can go ahead and do my first dry fit. There we go. And as I mentioned already, because I used a horizontal mortiser to cut both the end grain mortise and the long grain mortise, these pieces meet flush. The next step in the build process is to route out the recess to receive the glass. And because of the way this picture frame is designed, I'm going to need to create a stopped rabbet on these two pieces. But the two side pieces, the rabbet will run straight through. And we'll do all this at the router table using a rabbeting bit. Because I need to remove a lot of material for this rabbet, I'm going to remove the fence back with each successive cut. Because the cloud lift pieces have a stopped rabbet, I made marks on my fence to tell me where to start and stop the cut. In each corner where the two pieces come together, I'm going to need to clean this area up with a chisel, and I'll do that after the glue up. Because it can be potentially difficult to remove any glue squeeze out in between these two pieces, I'm going to go ahead and pre-finish this piece first. But before I do that, I'm going to seal off all the mortises with some blue tape. I didn't mention this before, but before I pre-finished these pieces, I sanded to 220 grit. And now we're ready to glue it up. Okay, I took the frame out of the clamps and it came out pretty nice. I went ahead and sanded the entire face of the frame down to 220 grit just to make sure these joints were exactly flush all the way around the frame. And I also eased the edges all the way around the frame with 220 grit sandpaper as well. I know what you're thinking. Why did I bother pre-finishing this piece if I was going to sand it anyway? Well, the pre-finish was just to make sure that I didn't have any problems with glue in these tight spaces in between here. It would have been very difficult to sand out any glue squeeze out in between these tight areas. Where all the corners come together in the frame, I need to notch out this little section here to make room for the glass, and I'll do that with a chisel. To keep from damaging the face of the frame as you use your chisels, make sure you have a nice soft material underneath. I'm just going to nibble away at this section until I have a nice corner. It doesn't have to be pretty. And there you can see the finished corner. The ebony plugs that I'm using for the picture frame are 3/8 inches wide square. But because I'm not brave enough to drill a 3/8 inch wide hole here in the frame, I start with a 1/4 inch hole and I work my way out with a chisel and I follow it up at the end with a 3/8 inch wide hollow chisel. In order to define the perimeter for the plug, I take my hollow chisel and I insert the bit that came with it inside the hollow chisel backwards. This is my 3/8 inch wide hollow chisel. Then I take the end of the hollow chisel and I insert it into the 1/4 inch hole that we just created, and I drop the bit onto the surface of the wood, and then by using a square, I can square up the edge of the hollow chisel and then just give it a good push to sink the corners of the bit into the wood. Now I've defined the perimeter of the plug. Now I'll take my 1/4 inch chisel and I'll slowly walk my way out to the perimeter that we just defined with the hollow chisel. Once I remove some of the material with the 1/4 inch wide chisel, I'll take my 3/8 inch wide hollow chisel and I'll insert the corners into the same spots that we created earlier, and I'll give it a good tap. Now I'll go back to my 1/4 inch chisel again and work my way a little closer to the perimeter of this square. The plugs on Greene style furniture is usually pillowed on the end. I like to start the pillowing process at my belt sander and follow it up with some regular sandpaper. After I've started the pillowing process at the belt sander, I'll move to 100 grit sandpaper, followed by 220, and then finally 320. Just by moving in a circular pattern over the surface of the sandpaper, you can create a nice pillow on the end of your ebony stick. The plug depth is just shy of a 1/4 inch. So what I'll do is I'll take my plug and I'll make a mark just below the shoulder of the pillow and create a mark at just around a 1/4 inch. Once I've created the mark on the ebony plug, I'll go ahead and use the same chisel fixture that we used last time for our strips of ebony. Just go ahead and rest the plug next to the chisel fixture. And I like to use these pull saws when I'm cutting ebony. So just rest it on the mark that we created and cut off your plug. Because my ebony plugs are 15/1000ths of an inch wider than the holes that they're going into, I need to back cut them on all 4 sides using a chisel. In order to glue the ebony plug in place, just take a little bit of glue on the end of a toothpick and work some glue around the inner edges of this hole. Because we have a really nice tight fit with this ebony plug, it's not going to take a lot of glue to hold this guy in. I'll just take your ebony plug, seat it in there, and give it a good tap. There we go. Okay, and there's the finished plug after being seated. Now if I were to make this piece again, I probably would have moved this plug back a little bit more. Only 3 more plugs left and this piece will be finished. Okay, so this piece is essentially finished. All that's left to do now is put on a nice coat of polyurethane and it'll be done. So after a couple coats of polyurethane, the picture frame is finally finished. And if you'd like to make your own, you can find a measured drawing at my website. And thanks for watching.